Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Cheatham, Manager of Philanthropy with the Dominion Energy Charitable Foundation. On behalf of Dominion Energy and our 17,000 employees across the country, it's my privilege to welcome you all to tonight's event. We are proud to count the Festival of the Book and Virginia Humanities as one of our longest-standing community partners, and I'm honored that Dominion Energy is the sponsor of tonight's event. I'm looking forward to a terrific discussion this evening featuring 3 best-selling authors with new books. As I'm sure you all know, tonight's event is entitled Finding the Light. A theme about light, I can promise you Dominion Energy had nothing to do with selecting that theme. And this would be the point that it would be a little too easy to say something witty about Dominion Energy knowing anything about light. So I'm going to turn it over to Matthew Gibson, Executive Director of Virginia Humanities.
Good evening, everyone. It's really good to see you. Good evening. Thank you. Excellent. I'm Matthew Gibson. I'm the Executive Director of Virginia Humanities. It's delightful to see you all this evening, and I want to welcome you also to the 29th Annual Virginia Festival of the Book. So before I hand it over to our esteemed writers and panelists and moderator tonight, I think in some ways the job of the executive director is really a job of giving thanks. And I just want to recognize a few folks. First of all of you. You're here, you're supporting the festival, you're supporting the culture of the book, and of course maybe you've even supported the Festival of the Book financially, and that really means a lot to us. Because obviously, as we all know, the festival is mostly free of charge, but never really free to produce. But without you, we wouldn't be able to have this each and every year. You know, some people say it takes a village to raise a child. It certainly takes a village to raise the Festival of the Book. I also want to thank our contractors, Ray Nedsel, Dana Ainsworth, and Paul Guest, without whom we would not also be able to be here tonight, and our volunteers, many of whom are also here this evening. Third, our major financial sponsors. It certainly goes without saying that the Dominion Energy Charitable Foundation has been with the Festival of the Book from the very beginning, and we are very excited that they are still with us this evening. And I also want to thank our premier sponsor of the festival this year and last year, in the past few years, the Joseph and Robert Cornell Memorial Foundation. And fourth, the incredible staff of Virginia Humanities. You'll see Nina Wilder right there taking pictures, for instance. But the staff have been really tremendous in bringing this all together. We literally say this is an all-hands-on-deck affair, and it truly is. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank Kalela Williams, the director of the Center for the Book, and Aaron Donovan, the assistant director for the Center for the Book. Just a sort of glimpse into what they do and what they've been doing for the past 6 months. You know, these two folks have created something truly miraculous and magical this year, and they really didn't have a long time to do it. So my heart and my thanks and my indebtedness go out to both of them. But I've rambled long enough. So tonight, we're going to hear from authors Matthew Quick, Honorée Fanonne Jeffers, and Megan O'Rourke. Matthew Quick's most recent novel, We Are the Light, was named a #1 Indie Next Pick and has met critical acclaim. He's a recipient of a PEN/Hemingway Award honorable mention and has won an LA Times Book Prize finalist. His novel, The Silver Linings Playbook, was made into an Oscar-winning film, and The Hollywood Reporter named him one of Hollywood's 25 most powerful authors. Matthew lives in North Carolina's Outer Banks with his wife, novelist Alicia Bassett, author of Smile, Beach Murder. Honorée Fanonne Jeffers is a poet, essayist, and novelist. She's the author of 5 critically acclaimed books of poetry, with her most recent book of poetry, The Age of Phyllis, longlisted for the National Book Award. Her New York Times best-selling novel, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, was also longlisted for the National Book Award. A professor at the University of Oklahoma, she has won fellowships from the American Antiquarian Society, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the MacDowell Colony, the National Endowment for the Arts, and numerous other institutions. Last and not least, Megan O'Rourke is a New York Times bestselling author, poet, editor, and podcaster whose work often tackles challenging subjects such as chronic illness and grief. She's the editor of the Yale Review and has been the recipient of numerous literary awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Radcliffe Fellowship, a Lannan Literary Fellowship, and the Union League Prize for Poetry from the Poetry Foundation. She'll be exploring her newest book, The Invisible Kingdom, Reimagining Chronic Illness. Their conversation tonight will be moderated by our very own Kalila Williams. So please, without further ado, welcome our authors and moderator.
All right, I'm so excited to be here with Honorée Fanonne Jeffers, Matthew Quick, Megan O'Rourke. This is just an incredible presence here, just amazing. And I'm very sorry. I want to relay our apologies and regrets that Vaishnavi Patel could not be here tonight. Unfortunately, she wanted to relay that because of illness, she's unable to be here, but she's very sad that she's unable to make it. But I'm really excited about our panel of authors. And I want to thank Pauline Cheatham and Matthew Gibson. We have so many Matthews in our office that for a minute, I'm just like, wait, there's too many Matthews. There's a Matthew here, there's just Matthews everywhere. We just got a new Matthew. It's just getting, it's getting to be a bit much.
You can call me Matthew. Megan is close.
Never too many Matthews.
I think we can get right into it. We're going to talk about some commonalities in your very disparate books, but first, I want to hear about your books individually. So each of you has a little bag underneath your chair. Matthew, we're going to start with you. Could you go ahead and reach
Sure.
under? Yeah, take a look at your bag. They don't know what's in here.
No.
I love it.
I was told there was a puppy. I'm kind of disappointed.
A very tiny puppy. Yeah, go ahead and. Do you know what that is? Okay.
I have no idea.
Okay. Knitting needles? No, they're not knitting needles. They're tent stakes.
Ah,
Tent
nice.
stakes, yeah. So can you tell us how those tent stakes speak to your newest work?
Well,
We
my
Are the
novel,
Light.
in my novel, We Are the Light, after a tragedy that happens, my character, Lucas Goodgame, who was a former high school counselor who has been affected by this tragedy and is not able to go into the school anymore, one of the boys he was counseling sets up a tent in his backyard and kind of forces this relationship that leads to a town revival.
Awesome, yeah. Yeah, so tent stakes.
I was not expecting this.
No, absolutely. Matthew, if you wouldn't mind reading a short passage from your work.
Yeah,
That
sure.
sound good? You can maybe go to the podium if you'd like, or wherever.
Should we go to the podium? Or?
You can do whatever you want.
Okay.
Whatever makes you feel comfortable. All right. Woo woo!
Okay, so to set up this passage, there's a few people that you need to know. So this is an epistolary novel, so it's a novel written in letters. My protagonist, Lucas Goodgame, is writing to his former Jungian analyst, Carl. Lucas, yeah, it's Carl with a K in the book. I appreciate those who get the joke. So This is a scene where Eli, the young man, comes and sets up his tent in Lucas's backyard. And Lucas has been rocked by this tragedy where he's been declared the hero afterwards. He doesn't feel like the hero. He's lost his wife. He thinks his wife is visiting him in the form of an angel. His wife, Darcy's best friend, Jill, is living with him to try to get him through this period. And he needs to decide whether he's going to engage with Eli, if he's mentally well enough to engage with Eli. So I'll read that passage. An awful noise woke me up in the middle of the night. I sat up in my bed and looked around, but I was still half asleep. It took a few minutes for my eyes to adjust and my brain to come back online. But when it did, I stood and walked over to the window, which Jill must have opened for me, because neither she nor I like to sleep in air conditioning. It gives us sore throats. I could see the tent glowing like a jack-o'-lantern again. It looked extra bright because there was no moonlight whatsoever. I heard this blood-curdling moaning that reminded me of what I heard after the shooting was over at the Majestic Theater. It almost sounded like a psychic operation without anesthesia, like someone was trying to extract Eli's soul out there in the tent. The next thing I remember is walking down the stairs in my home with Jill following close behind, saying, "We need to call the police. That boy needs help." I couldn't, of course, tell her that winged Darce had said that I couldn't, of course, tell her what winged Darce had said about Eli being the way forward. So instead, I kept saying, "No police." "Your neighbors are going to call the police if they haven't already," Jill answered, but I just ignored her. When I reached the back door, she turned me around so that I was facing her and said, "I don't think you're ready for this." I could tell she was afraid, but I wasn't quite sure of what. I wanted to get to the bottom of Jill's fear, but I thought it best to triage, and Eli's moaning was concerning enough to pull rank. So I exited and made my way toward the orange glow. Eli must have heard the back door open because he immediately tried to quiet his suffering, but managed only to turn down the volume, as I could still hear him whimpering softly. I wonder if he had buried his face in his sleeping bag, but when I unzipped his tent and stuck my head inside, I saw that Eli had his face in his hands, which were literally dripping with tears. When I touched his shoulder, just like Isaiah had done for me many times, Eli flinched, so I pulled my hand back, and then I remembered my plan. I entered the tent, pulling the zipper closed behind me, and then sat cross-legged across from him and softened my gaze before I tried to find him on the astral plane. After 5 minutes or so, he dropped his hands and began to stare back at me. I could feel his breathing slowing, and I could sense that he was relaxing a bit. Finally, he said, "I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have anywhere else to go." "It's okay," I said, and then continued attempting to do what you had done for me many times in your consulting room, when you psychically entered me, when the best of your soul wrapped itself around the best of my soul. "What are you doing?" he asked, but in a calm way. So I told him that I was trying to calm him down and that it was working, so maybe he should just go along with it, which thankfully he did. We sat in silence for a long time, quietly looking at each other, and I could feel Jill outside worrying and wondering what was happening inside the tent. But somehow she knew better than to break our man spell with the words or by entering, which I appreciated greatly. I could also hear the steady beating of Darcy's wings high above. I could feel her looking down on me with angelic approval, since angels can easily see through thin tent fabric. I wondered if Jill might decide to tilt her head back and search for the origin of that beating wing sound, but she never let out a cry of joy or astonishment, so I don't believe that she ever looked up, which was both a pity and a relief. As I sat in the tent with young Eli, I could feel his pain and frustration and loneliness leaving his body. I could literally feel his muscles relaxing and his psyche regaining a stronghold. And then I was laying him down on my living room couch and covering him with a sheet and telling him that he was okay and that he had come to the right place and that I was going to help him get better no matter how long it took. And I could feel Jill watching with approval from the dark corner of the room, and I began to wonder where the necessary strength had come from, because I could feel the power of what the best of my soul was doing for Eli, which was awesome in the true sense of the word, filling me with a sense of awe. Just before the boy drifted off to sleep with eyes closed, he whispered, "Mr. Goodgame, I don't hold you responsible." Before I had a chance to reply, he had lost consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so great being on stage with Matthew. We went to graduate school together, and there's some the moments of Eli and Lucas staring at each other made me think of that workshop with do you remember the workshop?
Paul Selleck?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, this is.
This is the inside joke.
No,
it's
it's
not
like,
really
we're
a
not letting
joke.
everybody in.
It's not really a joke. We just stared at each other's faces and just sort of looked for the chakra. Our graduate program leader was a medium. It still is a medium. Yeah. So there was definitely some. It felt very familiar to me, and it. Yeah.
Do a lot of that in my Jungian analysis too. It can be very powerful to stare somebody in the eyes for a long period of time. And if you've never done it, it can be quite overwhelming and intimidating too. But it can also be very healing to hold somebody that way, to just look in their eyes and try to connect with the best of their soul. You know, and it's not something I don't think we do that enough in our culture, and particularly amongst men.
Yeah.
Which is a big problem, I think.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a bit, but yeah, for sure. So Honorée, so happy to have you here. And Honorée's book is a National Book Critics Circle Award winner, an Oprah Book Club pick, all the accolades, and of course, so, Honorée, would you like to see what's inside your baggie? What's inside your lantern bag?
This is a lot to process. Oh. You gonna do this in Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ginger. Okay, go ahead.
Can you tell us how this might relate to your work, just in whatever way you interpret that?
Ginger is a folk remedy for terminating pregnancy early. So that's why I said you're going to do this in Virginia. But yeah. So so Ailey's parents had to get married. The older people in the room know what I mean. They got pregnant, and her mother, her grandmother, Ailey's grandmother, Miss Rose, first name Miss, middle name Rose. And black folks did that, back in the day, so people would respect their children, because black women in the Deep South were not given honorifics. So in this way, Miss Rose's mother made sure that someone would always call her black girl and then woman Miss. She gave Belle, Ailey's mother, a packet of ginger in case she ever lost her head with a boy. And so that's the significance of that. So.
And ginger is also a root.
Ginger is a root, yes. And I can tell you love Uncle Root already. Everybody loves Uncle Root. Yeah, I love vulnerable men, and I love vulnerable black men, and I wanted to write a character that would encourage that in my brothers. So, but I had no idea that he would be so beloved by everybody who read the book. So.
Well, I think you're onto something with his vulnerability, with him being an old. They say there are old black men, there are bold black men, but there are no old bold black men. That's that old saying. And so I think that his humbleness, his humility, and yet his strength and righteous anger is something something to gravitate towards, maybe.
And he is, even though he will not admit to being a feminist, he's very feminist.
Yes.
He's surrounded by women. He's not intimidated by strong women. He ministers to them constantly. Getting a little choked up. I love Uncle Root. I miss him. You know, I miss him a lot. Yeah.
Would you mind reading us a passage?
Sure. I'm going to try not to trip over these long pants legs on this jumpsuit.
Nice shoes, by the way.
I was telling people the lovely photographer, I said, I studied the 18th century, so these are my Baroque shoes. Thank you, Kalela, for having me here. Thank you for the Virginia Festival of the Book. Thank you, Ms. Rita Dove and Mr. Fred Vibon for being here. Thank you for our wonderful ASL interpreters. I'm just... So, I'm going to read a section in the book, a very short section. Ailey has been sent down south. Her father has had a heart attack. And so typically she goes down south with her mother and her two sisters to Chickasetta, but this year her oldest sister Lydia is in trouble. She's disappeared. Her middle sister Coco has decided not to go to Chickasetta, and her mother is staying up north in the city to take care of Ailey's father. So Uncle Root comes to pick her up from the airport, and she's really surly, as Ailey is a lot. So Uncle Root tells the story that he hopes will make Ailey feel a little better. When Uncle Root turned on the classical station, the radio man solemnly whispered, "It's 99 degrees in the Atlanta metropolitan area," before he introduced the flower duet from Lockme. "How was your flight, Ailey?" "Like a ride at Six Flags. I thought I was gonna throw up and then die when the plane crashed." "I will take that to mean your journey was unpleasant." I leaned against the car window, closing my eyes. "Ailey, did I ever tell you about the time I met Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois? You know who that is, right? Can you let me just take my nap?" I wanted to close my eyes and dream of the vineyard, of the beach in front of my grandmother's cottage populated with bougie Negroes. Uncle Root raised his voice and continued. "I entered Rutledge College in the fall of 1922. I was 15 and my father sent me there. The school at Red Mound Church didn't go past 8th grade back then. That wouldn't happen for a very long time. At Rutledge, I had a professor who loved himself some Du Bois. His name was Mr. Terrence Carter Holmes, and there used to be all these rumors he was communist. He loaned me his copy of Dark Water and told me to be careful with it. After that, I just kept borrowing every book by Du Bois that Mr. Holmes owned. The next fall, there was a rumor on campus that Du Bois would be visiting Atlanta University, the great scholar himself. A friend told me. Robert Lindsay was his name, but we called him Rob Boy. He was very good people and came from wealthy folks. You could always borrow $1 if you got in a tight spot. That was some money in those days. Rob Boy and I decided to drive to Atlanta. We woke up early that next morning, and after driving in Rob Boy's car with no water or food, we were hungry. We hadn't thought to pack a sandwich or even a bottle of Coca-Cola. We thought about the conversations Dr. Du Bois and I would have. We'd let him know that we didn't agree with that bootlicking Booker T. Washington. We wanted to be intellectual, free Negro men, not somebody's farmers. At Atlanta University, we found out where Dr. Du Bois was staying. We ran up the stairs to his building, 3 flights I'll never forget. We knocked, and the great scholar answered himself. Uncle Root twisted the radio knob, lowering the volume. I sat up. Despite myself, I was interested. It was Dr. Du Bois? For real? Indeed, it was him. He didn't have a lot of hair left. The old man ran his fingers through his thick silver curls, and he was shorter than I was, but he had a way about him. Sort of like Elder Beasley at church. Exactly right. He knew he was important, and everybody else did too. What'd he say, Uncle Root? Yes, he asked. I had to catch my breath. Those stairs had tired me out. We came to see you, Dr. Du Bois. We came to see the great scholar. Well, he said, now you have seen me. And he closed the door in our faces. That was it? That was it. Permission to speak freely? Since I'd started high school, the old man had allowed me 3 curse words per week if I didn't slip up in front of other elders. Permission granted. Dr. Du Bois seems like a real asshole. The old man giggled. Oh, Lord, please don't ever speak of him that way in public, I beg of you. I won't, but doesn't he sound like an asshole to you? No comment. And you only have 1 curse word left this week. Last paragraph. No matter how many times I've navigated that stretch, there is a feeling. The odor of cow manure, County Line Road, and a long red dirt driveway. The peach trees, an entire continent when I was a little girl. Cotton planted almost 2 centuries ago, and then soybeans to rest the soil. Miss Rose sitting on a porch, beside her a bushel basket of ripe peaches or tomatoes. Early morning, she starts singing, what a friend we have in Jesus. And that's your cue to rise, to eat the heavy breakfast that will keep you full all day. After dinner, the piecing together of quilt tops from remnants until the light completely fades. The next morning, it starts again, a woman singing off-key praises to the Lord, the sweet fruit dripping with juice, the sound of bugs. I thought of what Mama liked to say. To find this kind of love, you have to enter deep country.
I was telling Honorée, I'm from Georgia, and reading her book is coming home. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly, the wonderful, the bountiful, just all of it, all of it. So thank you. So Megan O'Rourke is the only author I have not known previously to this panel, but I listened to your audiobook, which you read, and I've listened to your voice and heard your story, and I feel like I know you, of course, because well, we'll talk about that more. But do you mind opening your bag?
I'm so excited. I take my little kids to birthday parties and they get these little bags.
Oh,
at
you'll
the end,
be all right. You'll be all right.
I feel kind of sad that I don't, but So, is this it? No.
Open it up. There's a little.
Oh, I think it fell out.
There's a piece of paper, and do you see anything on it?
No.
Okay. There's a pen inside of your bag.
Oh.
Okay. And there's a little light at the end of the pen, so you have to click that little light on.
This is cool.
All right. So hold it, and then.
Wait,
and then,
I don't have enough
yeah.
hands. Okay.
It's going to take a little doing with the microphone.
Oh my God, this is the coolest book festival ever. Right? It says unnamed, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
what it says.
Awesome.
Unnamed. Unnamed. So if you just show everybody this piece of paper, it's a blank piece of paper. It looks blank, but when she shines a light on it, it says unnamed.
You can see. Let's see if anyone.
I mean,
Well,
it'll be hard for the audience to
It'll be
see,
hard
but
to,
but
but-
can you tell us how this might relate to your work?
yeah, this is amazing. Well, first of all, it's invisible, right? The name, there's something unnamed, there's something that's hard to put into language, and there's something invisible. And so my book, The Invisible Kingdom, is about my own experience, but also the experience really of millions of Americans of living with an unnamed, mysterious illness for more than a decade before I got any kind of diagnosis. And in that period of time, I looked quite well. So I had what is often called an invisible illness. And that invisibility is actually the thing that almost killed me. Not just the challenge of living with an illness, the challenge of being sick, but the challenge of going unseen and unnamed in language and unheard, therefore. And the thing that, this is really true, the thing that kept me going, I left a particular doctor who was, let's say, a little patronizing. I'm sure none of you have ever had that experience. And I'm sure any doctors in this office in this room are not the patronizing kind. But she had patronized me and rushed me out the door and sort of said, well, maybe you just need to try harder at being well. And I got outside, and I just remember there was this really dusty Prius. I was in LA at the time, and I kind of leaned against it, and I felt this loneliness that I had never felt as deeply before. And I realized that it was the loneliness of being outside language and experience. And in that exact moment, I really did have this kind of vision where I was like, but I'm not alone, right? The fact that I, a relatively well-off, privileged person, am having this experience means there's millions of us having this experience. And that was the moment the book really was born, was out of that deep, deep loneliness, and in that sense that through story we can find one another, we can find this invisible kingdom. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Megan, would you mind reading a few words from your book?
Sure.
You can sit in your seat. You can go to the podium, whatever is more comfortable.
I'll
for
go to
you.
the, I feel like I've got to join the trio
No
here.
pressure.
And,
And Megan's book
tradition.
was a finalist for the National Book Award, and along with her other many small fellowships that she got, those little tiny ones, Guggenheim, whatever. What's that?
First, I gotta bring the mic down because I'm small. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I think so. This is just such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I love Charlottesville. I'm totally besotted. And thank you for being here on this rainy night to share stories, to share language. So I'm gonna read you a couple of pages of this chapter 4 in the book. And the chapter is called Impersonation. And it's really about the this invisibility that I was just talking about. And I think I wrote, the book weaves my story, it weaves memoir with quite a lot of research. It took 8 years to write. And a lot of that 8 years was spent interviewing other people living with illnesses, chronic illnesses, and also doctors, scientists, healers, historians, because I really wanted to understand why was it that in an age where we almost rush to diagnoses, right? My son just got diagnosed with sphenopalatine ganglioneuralgia. Does anyone know what that is? Ice cream headache. Right? But I can't get diagnosed. I couldn't get diagnosed for 15 years with what ended up being an autoimmune disease and an autonomic nervous system disorder and also Lyme disease. So I became really interested in why are so many of us living outside of a conceptual framework, and what does it do to us? How are we changed when we are outside of story? What kind of stories creep in? So that's what this book tries to animate. So this is about that. One of the hardest things about being ill with a poorly understood disease is that most people find what you're going through incomprehensible, if they even believe you are going through it. In your loneliness, your preoccupation with an enduring new reality, you want to be understood in a way that you can't be. Pain is always new to the sufferer, but loses its originality for those around him, the French novelist Alphonse Daudet observes in his book, In the Land of Pain. Everyone will get used to it, except me. That's one of the most powerful statements, I think, about pain and being sick, is that everyone else gets used to it, but you never do. Worrying that your symptoms are psychosomatic or even imagined is part of life for many people with poorly understood illnesses. Although the experience of illness is not just in the head, it is also not just in the body. The person enduring such an illness faces a difficult balancing act. On the one hand, she must advocate for herself, even when doctors are indifferent or ignorant, and not be deterred when she knows something is wrong. On the other, she also must be willing to ask whether an obsessive attention to symptoms is going to lead to better health. The patient has to hold in mind two contradictory modes, in other words, insistence on the reality of the disease and resistance to her own catastrophic fears. I found it hard that fall to strike that balance. I was increasingly worried. After all, a terrible anxiety attends chronic illness. Over time, it becomes difficult to untangle the suffering from symptoms like pain from the suffering inflicted by the anxiety over the possibility of more pain and worse outcomes in the future. This does not mean that the illness is in the mind. Rather, the mind, that machine for making meaning, makes endless meanings of its new state, which may themselves influence the experience. It was in this recursive hall of mirrors, trying to adjust to my body's ailments, that I lived. There is a loneliness to illness, a child's desire to be pitied and seen, but it is precisely this recognition that is elusive. How can you explain and identify your condition if no one has any grasp of what it is you suffer from, and the symptoms wax and wane? How do you describe a disease that's not always there? As I got sicker that winter, I no longer had the sense that I was a distinct person. On most days, I felt like a mechanism that moved arduously through the world, simply trying to complete its tasks. Sitting upright at my father's birthday dinner at a quiet restaurant required a huge act of will. Normally, absorption in a task and immersive flow can lead you to forget that you feel pain, but my fatigue made such a state impossible. I might, at the nadir of my illness, have been able to write any one of these sentences, but I would not have been able to make paragraphs of them. To be sick in this way is to have the unpleasant feeling that you are impersonating yourself. When you're sick, the act of living is more act than living. Healthy people have the luxury of forgetting their existence depends on a cascade of precise cellular interactions. Not you. Farewell me, cherished me, now so hazy, so indistinct, Daudet writes, a line I now often thought of. Thank you.
So we've heard, thank you so much, Megan. We've heard a few words of just incredible words. I encourage you all to, frankly, I encourage you to visit the bookseller after this, because I have thoroughly enjoyed diving into these books. And if you haven't read them, I would highly recommend every single one of them. But I want to ask some questions because I found some commonalities in all of your work, as I mentioned before. So before we talk about finding the light, I want to talk about shadow. And I don't want to say darkness, because I think darkness is beautiful. But I want to talk about and shadows are beautiful too. But I want to talk about these moments. And I'm going to start with a question that I actually intended to ask when Vaishnavi was going to join us. But I realized that it still applies to your work too, Megan, although it's not necessarily named as strongly. But there's an idea of monsters and in your work. And this can get tough. This can get tough. I want to just tell you all, this might get tough. But can you talk about the idea of monsters in your work? Honorée, do you want to start?
Yes. First, I'd like to thank you for saying shadow instead of darkness. I try to encourage people not to use images of light and dark for good and evil, because I am a dark-skinned woman, and I feel like people ascribe ugliness to darkness. So shadow is, you know, and I think darkness is beautiful in Black women. So in terms of monsters, there are plenty of mean people in my book. African American, European American, men, women, you know, the whole range of gender, who, you know, there are some people. And then there are really good people in the book, too. But to try to say this succinctly, there's one particular person, Samuel Pinchard, who's a slave master. And one of the reasons that there's a section on monsters about him is that I don't believe in evil. I think evil is a cop-out that people use to release themselves from personal responsibility. I always tell my students that each of us has a road within that can go left or can go right. And it is up to us to really try to be careful every step of the way in our lives, so that, because there are these little small moments, and then another small moment, and then so on and so forth. I think that's why our country is in such turmoil right now, because we have people where they're like, well, you know, my parents taught me blah, 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 not to, you know, look at color and whatever, and then the next thing you know, they're screaming at you in the Walmart or what, you know, whatever. So I wanted to show how someone moved from a child who was abused, someone who really needed love and protection. You know, every child is born with a birthright of love. And then how this child moved into a monster. And the way that he moved to a monster is that there was no one there to stop him. There was no one there to challenge him. You know, he was in a time of slavery where Black people had no power to assault a Black child or assault a Black woman, and that's all I'll say, was a crime against property. It was not a crime against a person legally. And so when you have someone who is just able to run with scissors, you know, and do whatever they want to do, that's very dangerous. And very few people, when offered that kind of power, will reject it. Most of us, of all races, cultural backgrounds, all gender, if someone says, you can do whatever you want to do and nobody's going to stop you, very few of us are going to refuse that. So.
That's frightening, but I agree.
It
with
is.
You.
It's
I
very
agree
frightening.
with you, and I think this is speaking to, of course, the power of books to tell us what could be in all of us.
And tell us what to watch for in
Correct.
ourselves.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Matthew, could you talk about monsters in your work?
Sure, yeah. You know, in my book, there's a shooting in a movie theater, and afterwards, my protagonist, Lucas Goodgame, he takes on the brother of the shooter, Eli. Jacob was the shooter, and Eli has been scapegoated by the entire town, and people are projecting their shame onto this young boy who had nothing to do with the crime whatsoever. You know, he's this fragile young boy, and Lucas tries to redeem this young man and really mentor him, father him, try to right this wrong. And one of the things that Lucas is really upset about is that the older brother came through the school district where he worked, and he and his best friend, who's the principal, Isaiah, they have this thing where they look out for boys and they try to mentor, they try to help them. And so Lucas really views the shooting as a failure not only of the town but of the school, of everybody. And the town, rightly so, is looking for ways to deal with this. And one of the ways that they deal with the shame and the pain and the frustration is to project that all onto an 18-year-old boy that had nothing to do with it because his brother was so-called a monster. And one of the things that Lucas is talking about and thinking about as he's processing this is his own culpability and the community's culpability that, sometimes when we have something monstrous happen in our community, we want to project that onto other people. And the Jungian work that I do, we do shadow work. That's a big part of it. And the work is to reclaim those shadow elements. So when we see something happen that's tragic or awful, the first thing that we want to do so that we feel safe is we want to say, that's not me. That's someone else. Let's project all our pain and shame, and let's hate that person, and let's say things about them on the internet. But in the Jungian work that I do, the first thing we say is like, yes, that's me. That exists within me. That possibility exists within me because I'm a human being. So I have all the possibilities that all human beings can do are within me. And to understand and reclaim those shadow elements makes us whole so that we're not afraid. It doesn't excuse that bad behavior, but it allows us to deal with that bad behavior. So I always say in my book, there are two brothers in the book. One of them shoots people, and the other one shoots a movie. They make a movie. They try to heal their community with art. And so why does one brother shoot people, and why does one brother shoot a movie? Well, my answer is because the men in that community took an interest in one of the brothers and saved that brother and reached out and really redeemed that brother and loved that brother enough until he could love himself. And I think that's what I see when we talk about monsters. A lot of times it's a broad term. And, I think there is terrible things in the world, of course. There are people that do awful things, and we need to hold them accountable. But we also have to love those monstrous elements of ourselves so that we can also love the monstrous elements in other people so that we can redeem them before something awful happens. And I think that's the work, unfortunately, in our communities in this time that we're not doing enough of. So with my book, I try to hold up a mirror for ourselves so that we can reclaim those monstrous parts, so we can love the monsters in our communities so that these awful things will stop happening.
It's just incredible how much your books speak to each other. The mirrors look very different, but you're both holding up mirrors. Megan, I see something very different in your book. And again, this wasn't a question that was originally designed for your book, but I feel like there's something here. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, I actually, listening, I'm loving this question, loving thinking through the lens of monsters about my book. It's not a question that anyone has asked because there's not a literal monster, but listening to both Honorée and Matthew, I'm struck by the commonalities in the fact that I think we're all looking at things that the culture wants to look away from. Evil, fear. I think in my book, which is really focused not just on chronic illnesses, but particularly really on the ways we tell stories about diseases and conditions we don't understand and people's lived experience that we don't understand. And the point I try to make in the book is that when we don't understand what is wrong with someone, let's say if they're ill, we tell a story about it. And the story tends to be that it's somehow their fault. That they've done something to bring it on themselves, or that they're malingering, or that they've got, right, hypochondria, that in some ways it's an actual psychological problem that has to do with their very being. And I talk about how seeing that reflected at me changed my own sense of who I was so dramatically, I think, that I'm only now starting to kind of understand how profound that experience was. So my book is quite critical of a medical system that has not identified this spot of unseeing it has, that tends to psychologize people with poorly understood illnesses. But I think when I think about a monster, the real monster in the book is probably us, right? And the book is quite interested in why we're so scared to look illness in the face. And of course we're scared because it reminds us of our mortality, our imperilment, our fragility. But what I found writing it and what I found being sick is that when you look the thing that scares you in the face, it does allow for some kind of healing, right? I don't want to be too sunny about what that is, but it's what Matthew and Honorée have been saying. When you hold that mirror up, when you listen to the friend who's sick instead of trying to fix, something else happens. And I think that's where the monstrousness goes away, right? The monstrousness is our resistance to what is real, right? And to the real suffering amongst us.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I really do feel like these are again just incredibly different books, but just incredibly. There's a conversation here. There's a conversation in this reading, in this triad of readings. I want to talk about gender. Matthew, you mentioned it before, and we talked about it with Honorée. Just is there all of you? I feel like have the role of gender in your work, and do you feel that there's shadow in that place? Do you feel that there's light in that place? Do you feel that there's both? Do you feel that there's neither? And I'll just throw this out. Whoever wants to answer.
I can start since you said my name first. With my, yeah. So I'm gonna be the man who goes first, right? And the gender question.
It's okay.
Breaking ground here. Kaikeyi, you set me up for that. Well, in my novel, again, some of the Jungian work is that I've been doing is dealing with wounded masculinity. The men that raised me, my grandfather, my uncle in particular, were war vets. They were very damaged men and displayed a lot of toxic masculinity. And I was a victim of that as a child. My father was too, and that got passed down through the generations. But recently in the culture, I hear a lot about toxic masculinity, and rightly so. It's a conversation that we need to have. As someone who used to work with Harvey Weinstein, I know that this is a conversation that we need to have. And it doesn't just hurt women, it hurts men too, so this is deeply important. But the thing that I sometimes worry about as we're having these conversations is particularly for young men, they hear the word toxic masculinity over and over and over again, but they never hear the words positive masculinity. And so we're always telling them what they shouldn't be, but we're never telling them what they can aspire to, that can, in a way that they can contribute in a way that's beautiful, in a way that is going to benefit everyone. And so in my novel, there's a very intense relationship with Lucas and this 18-year-old young man. And Robert Bly coined the term father hunger back in the day. And Eli has intense father hunger, and Lucas has intense father hunger. And women can have father hunger as well. But I think in our culture, and it's particularly on book tour when I would go around talking about this, young men are so hungry to have these kind of conversations. They want to be intimate. They want to be intimate with other men. They want older men to mentor them. I gave a talk in Austin, and there were two young men filming in the background, and they're like in their early 20s. They're at the cameras, and as I'm talking, they kept looking at each other and smiling. And first I thought they were laughing at me, And afterwards, they came right up to me, a beeline for me afterwards, and I had been talking about my sobriety too, and they said, you know, we're in AA, we're recently sober, like we had no idea who you were, we'd never read any of your work, but the things that you were saying about sobriety and masculinity, we're so hungry for that. And then they said this to me, and I just about died. They said, thank you for being a member of the elder generation that gives back. I said, oh, whoa. That was a moment, and they were so sincere. Like they were trying to give me this like great compliment, but I realized that I've reached this part in my life where I am the elder man, and that there are young men that are hungry for wisdom, that they want to be initiated into manhood. They want to feel okay about being a man, and they want to know what that means. And so I think that we have a lot of work in our culture today to let these young men know that they're okay and there's a path forward where they can contribute in a positive way.
Does anybody else have thoughts about gender in their work? And thank you, Matthew. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Like, big thank you.
Okay. Well, I think you know, this was my first novel, and so I was kind of scared to write about the full range of gender, which I am now writing about, you know, in essays. So there's a binary in the book, and, you know, and I wanted folks to know that I didn't do that because I believe there's a binary. I did that because I wanted to make sure I got my skills right before I started writing about the full range of gender in Black communities. In terms of, you know, the binary of male and female, Uncle Root, there are several Black men in the book who were very vulnerable, and I wanted them to be that way. For a few reasons. First of all, I couldn't have, you know, people compare me to Toni Morrison, and that makes me feel very uncomfortable because Toni Morrison was a genius, and we will never see the like of her again. So I would never, ever compare myself to Toni Morrison. But this book could not have been possible without Beloved. And a character like Uncle Root could not be possible without Paul D. And I think about that line in Beloved at the end where he's thinking about Sixo and the 30-mile woman, and he says, she gather me, man, you know. And so I wanted there to be gathering Black men in the book who were not protecting Black women. I think that's a very patronizing concept, but who would be beside Black women and affirm the strength in them without getting rid of it, you know, without looking, you know, at it as some kind of you know, perversion. And so in terms of Black women, I was talking to a wonderful young brother, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, in the reception. And I was talking about how when I was on CBS this morning, and I had been praying all night because I knew what I wanted to say, but I was also afraid. When you're a Black person in publishing, you're always afraid to be too Black, that you're going to turn off, you know, white readers. But I do always try to lead with love, and so I wanted to say lovingly that I wrote this book for Black women. Because I think it's possible to write a book for Black women and to have non-Black people read and enjoy the book. All of her complexity is there, you know. And you know, I always tell the young folks, I'm not getting out there and marching. I'm too old for that. Might fall down and break a hip or, you know, something like that. I'm the one that'll, you know, pay for bail, you know. But for me, it was a revolutionary act to say I wrote this book for black women, and not only for black women, for dark-skinned black women like myself, like my mother, like all the black women who've been told that they're not beautiful. I wanted to write the book, and so the gender part is to talk about that, but also to explore the fact that black women have never been viewed. This is a difficult thing to parse through because I don't believe in the binary, but I do know that the binary has had power in American society. And so for black women to never actually fully be able to access that we are real women, we have whatever a real woman is. We've never been part of the cult of domesticity. We've never been allowed to be soft. There is always this attitude that we are one step from animals. Even the partis sequitur ventrum, the 1662 law, translates to offspring follows belly. That is a livestock rule, okay? And so gender for me is a very interesting and ongoing concept, you know. But I also believe that it is a beautiful thing that we haven't been allowed to be women, because now we are at the forefront of leading this country into a new way of looking at gender that is not about the binary and that allows everyone full humanity. And so instead of us being in the back, now we can say, here is the full range of gender in black communities, and we're moving forward. And there's still a lot of transphobia in the black community, but there's a new way of seeing things. So, you know.
I think that is there's so many things in what you said that ring true to me, and we don't have time to get into them all, but there's a conversation. I feel like so reading, you know, I mentioned reading Honorée's book was like going home, but I will say too, with one amazing thing about being a black writer is that you're always talking to each other across generations.
You truly
across generations. And you're collecting ideas and collecting and sharing
Because
stories.
Beloved wouldn't have been possible without incidents in the life of a slave girl.
Correct. Yes.
So we are always in conversation with each other and acknowledging tradition.
Yes.
And that's why there's an archival coda in the back of the book, because I don't want people to, you know, I think I'm a very brilliant person, but I also know that I did not spring fully formed from Zeus's head, you know. You know, there are people that came before me, and I think I wanted to claim that. I wanted to claim brilliance, but also say, here are all of these black women, you know, who made it. And even Dr. Du Bois, with all of his flaws, which he has many, he was very naughty. He had a mistress. He cheated on his mistress with, you know, other women, but he was a proto-feminist, you know.
It's and I think it's interesting, this idea of we're continuing tradition, but at the same time we're shedding the aspects of tradition, such as the transphobia and such as you know. So there's things to shed, and there's things to embrace as we move forward. Megan, I feel like gender also it plays a role. Yeah.
Definitely. And actually, it's been really enlightening, again, sitting here, getting to go last and hear what they have to say. But I was thinking, you know, the gender often comes up when I talk about my book because the kinds of illnesses I'm writing about, which include autoimmune disease, myalgic encephalomyelitis, long COVID, a million more fibromyalgia, et cetera, are this kind of category of disease that are characterized by dysfunction of the nervous system and immune system, often hand in hand. For some reason that we don't fully understand yet, autoimmune diseases are experienced, I think 75% of people who have most of them are women. There's there's one or two where men are the overwhelming people who live with autoimmune disease. Long COVID is similar. More women have long COVID than men, which has been used to cast aspersions on the reality of the illness, which tells you something, right? So writing my book, one of the things that immediately came up is one of the reasons that these illnesses are poorly understood and that people have a hard time getting diagnosed with them, the fact that many of the people going to doctors' offices are women. And the answer is yes, right? The answer is absolutely. Women are often seen to be particularly unreliable testifiers about their own bodies. And thanks to our expanding understanding of gender, we can also now add to that, that trans people also are experiencing this, and that if one of the problems for women is not just that they're not trusted, but that in fact we don't know enough about female biology. Most medical studies are done on male animals. Medications function very differently in different bodies. There's just an incredible knowledge gap, and that knowledge gap applies also to trans bodies. And that is one of the areas that I sort of explore in the book, and there's an entire chapter thinking about what are the ways in which the fact, sort of presentation, gender, affect how much someone is willing to listen to you as an authoritative testifier about your own experience. That said, I did interview men who were having their own troubles getting diagnosed. And the issues there seem to be very different. And in fact, in ways that speak to what Matthew was talking about, which is that one of the people I interviewed, the head of the Autoimmune Association, and I said, are men having the same troubles getting diagnosed, or is this really a gendered phenomenon? And she said, they're not having as much trouble, but it's because they come in on average 7 years further along in their disease process. And they're so sick by the time they go to the doctor that the tests come up blazingly definitive. Whereas women start feeling unwell and they start going to the doctor and saying, I think something's wrong, and the tests aren't good enough. It's already happening, but the tests aren't good enough yet. So that's something I always keep in mind now, that I think we are also misserving men, right? And we don't know how to encourage men to be vulnerable in their health, clearly, and we need to have that conversation as well.
Yeah. So Megan, could you also tell us how you channel the knowledge bearers in your book?
The knowledge bearers, did you say?
Yeah, there's a lot of knowledge bearers. There are a lot of knowledge bearers in your book.
I love that. Yeah, I just, I think when I get worried, so I think as a writer, what gets to me, the reason I'm a writer probably, is when people tell a fake story to hide a messier story, right? We probably there's things we could talk about in my childhood, right, that happened. There was a kind of a false story and then a messier story underneath. And so I think when I got sick, when I realized that the sickness was not just a biographical problem, but a literary problem, a writerly problem, it was because I realized that there was this false story being told and that there were these deeper, messier stories. And basically, the only way I could deal with that story was to seek out the knowledge bearers, whether it was medical historians, other patients, a philosopher friend of mine, and just say to them, what is going on? Basically, my research technique was to be like, what's going on? Why are we so unwilling to look suffering in the face? And my philosopher friend said, well, your suffering puts a burden on me, right? And I kind of bridled. And then he said, no, think about it. Like, to witness suffering, it takes an energetic toll. And the first step to getting to witness is to acknowledge that energetic toll that we ask of one another, and to say we owe that to one another, right? So basically all of these people's voices, I think, made their way into the book, and the research made their way into the book, not because I want to overwhelm the reader with medical research, but because I thought to know where we are, we have to look at science, we have to look at philosophy, we have to look at our biases, right? All of this, yeah.
Thank you. Matthew, do you feel like you channel knowledge bearers in your book?
Yeah, this is the first book I wrote while I was in analysis, and my analyst, so I speak with a couple times a week, is a very wise person. And one of the things he said to me when he first read the novel, which is very intimidating when your analyst reads your novel, because they're completely first of all, they know everything, but they are psychoanalyzing you. But one of the things he said in response early on is he says, "You still think you wrote this novel?" And what he meant was, he didn't mean that I didn't write it or I plagiarized it, but what he was saying is that so much of what we think we are is not really us. It's a gift from something else. And Jung describes this as the collective unconscious. So much of our subconscious is driven by these forces that we don't really understand. And we use our ego to focus on these tiny little things. And my ego says, I'm going to sit down in a chair and I'm going to type every day and I'm going to put my name on the cover and it's mine. But the novel is born not only of my life experiences, but that were given to me by my parents and the people in my life, but all the people I talked to and the conversations I had and all of my teachers and my friends and pretty much all of this information that I'm gleaning from other people. But also, and this is a very Jungian thing, but the collective unconscious, the Jungian work teaches me that the self is trying to manifest and is trying to help me get into the world, the thing that I was brought into this world to put into this world. And a lot of our ego and the work that, what we think we are every day interferes with that. And for me, my analyst teaches me, because I've been someone that's suffered from horrible anxiety my entire life. He said that anxiety is a gift because it's the thing that you use to track when you're not allowing your true self to come into the world. And so, like getting out of the way of that and monitoring that and allowing something greater than me to come through the work is really important. I was blocked for 3 years before I wrote We Are the Light. I did not want to write an epistolary novel. I did not want to write about a shooting, but I went to analysis and that was the thing that came through me. That was the thing that wanted my analyst says down and out. That's the thing that I wanted to put into the world. So that's a very humbling new part of my life. And particularly, I think my sobriety affected that a lot. When I got sober, to realize that the success I've had, the stories that I've been able to put into the world, I've just been a servant to put them into the world. And, kind of ego wants to make that about me, but really, there's so many other people that have influenced that. And I think having the humility to serve the story, which is kind of an old writer's trope, is really something that I've been focusing on and kind of letting go. And even before I came out on stage, I close my eyes and I say, this isn't about you. Like maybe there's something that needs to come through. Maybe somebody in the audience needs to hear that. I'm open, I'm receptive, I'm willing to serve. And so I think that's how I deal with it.
Yeah.
I'm making church noises.
I love it. It's great to get these noises.
Yeah. I feel I'm on stage with knowledge bearers right here. Honorée, not to put you on the spot, but you have a knowledge bearer in your title, in your book's title, and in your most two recent books' titles.
Well, for me, and I was talking to Miss Rita earlier at the reception saying she's known me since my hot mess days. So ego used to be, I still struggle a lot. Ego used to be a lot for me. I would be like, when somebody got a prize that I wanted, and I'd be like, how come they got this prize and I didn't get this prize, And it was a thing. I'm saying it like it's funny, but it was a thing, and it was not a good look, but it was also more than not a good look. It was it was getting in the way of the work that I really needed to do. And so, you know, my mentor, Lucille Clifton, I remember I called her when someone had won a prize that I really wanted, and I was just going off. And she said, this person, who was a dear friend, and I've told her this story, so she knows, you know, now, but she had won the Pulitzer, and I was just really jealous, and Miss Lucille was listening to me, and she said, Ani, I haven't won the Pulitzer, and I am in my 70s. And that's when I sort of stopped, and I had to really understand that here was this woman that I revered, who really was my spiritual guide, and that people really revered her work. And, you know, she said, it doesn't matter. You know, she said this to me. And then she said, this is my point. I have seen you on stages. I have had a vision of you. And I said, Miss Lucille, you're just saying that. You're just saying that because you love me. And she said, no, Ani, I have seen it. And when Oprah Winfrey called me, I sat on my couch and I said, oh my God. You know, it was because I felt Miss Lucille with me in that moment. I felt her. In the same way that I felt her, I have felt my ancestors move me. When you talk about ego, this is not the book. People always laugh when I say, Love Songs was supposed to be a beach read. It was supposed to be a beach read. That was the book that I had planned. It was supposed to be, you know, a light kind of thing, some naughty parts, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then that was going to be it. And then I started having dreams, ancestral dreams. And that led me to, and there are like characters in the book that people, I mean, some people who are really close readers may know. You're so sweet. Thank you, my brother. May know that Pop George and Little Man Joe are gods, right? But a lot of people, you know, I heard someone say, well, what happened to the character of Little Man Joe? I'm like, Little Man Joe is immortal. He, you know, and Pop George is immortal, right? Because he's like, he lives to be like 150 years old, and he's got every one of his teeth, you know. There's all of that, right? So I wanted to really, you know, on the one hand, I wanted to write a particular story after the dreams came, but on the other hand, it wasn't even about what I wanted. When I go back to the book, there are places where I can't even understand how I wrote it. You know, that doesn't mean that I don't think I'm a very smart person or that I haven't worked on my craft or whatever, but there are moments where I understand that this was the book, and it's the same thing with The Age of Phyllis. I will never write another book like Love Songs again. There are other books that are coming, you know, if my creator says the same, and I hope they are very successful, but there will never be a book like that in me again. This is it, because it was everything that I had ever wanted to talk about my people. You know, when I think about this book, I'm reminded, you know this poem by Margaret Walker, for my people, with their dirges and their ditties. This was it. This was, And I thought, if I die, this is the book that I want everyone to remember, that she loved her people. And so that's the knowledge.
Your people love you back. Before I break down on stage, I think it's interesting that all of these objects, we could do a swap-a-roo where the stakes of writing such a vulnerable book, such a book that makes yourself vulnerable for Megan, the root of hope for Matthew, the unnamed, and making the invisible visible for Honorée. I feel like these little bags, but I've got a bag too. And I hope I counted right. Because English major. But I'm going to give each of you two. I want each of you to take two of these. Or you can just pass it down. You can just pass the whole stack.
Is there invisible ink on this?
No, there's not yet. But I want you, if you take one, Honorée, and Megan, you already have a pen. So everybody's got two slips. Oh, I'll take the last bit. So
This is cool.
so you take the cap off, and there's a little, oh look, there's one for me too. So now that we've gotten a chance to, I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just entirely whatever, but I feel like we've all gotten a chance to know each other a bit. And I know Matthew. Matthew has been a mentor to me, and Honorée, just we haven't had a close history, but we've had a history. We've had a longer history where my Furious Flower days, where with Dr. Joanne Gabin and Rita Dove, and just this powerful community of Black writers. And Megan, we just met, and y'all just met each other, I think. But I want you to think about a word that might bring light to your fellow panelists. So let's just maybe take a little minute to think about a word that could bring light to your panelists. And you can opt out too if this is just too much. It's a little writing prompt. It could be whatever you want to say. You're writers. You can say it can be a message. I wanted to keep it. I was like, oh, don't ask them to write a whole treatise, but like.
We're doing invisible ink here.
Yeah, we're doing invisible ink.
These are cute. Where did you get these from?
Online, the site that we will not say because I was in a hurry. So you just have to open it.
I hope that I wrote something. I can't see.
It looks like I know, and no, it's hard to have good handwriting.
I know.
I'm a little.
I just wrote the first two that came.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a writing prompt, and it's
So
hard
we're
to do it
supposed
on
to
stage.
do two?
I want you to share these with each other.
You write the same twice or no?
Yeah, it's okay. There's no rules. It's a writing prompt. No rules.
While we're doing this, when I met Matthew, I asked him, was he a light-skinned Black man?
I almost lied.
Right, because he has that sort of swagger, of
He
a Black
does.
man.
He does. Yeah, no. He
Yeah.
definitely does. He does.
Wow.
He does. No. Yeah. I could see
And then
that.
he said, I'm from Philly. And I said, oh, okay.
You don't want to mix them up.
Right. So here's one for, so I'm going to put yours here. Okay. Those there. And then, I think, yeah, let's see. This is very complicated.
It does get a little complicated. Perhaps I didn't think this through.
I don't think mine are showing.
okay, so there's a little thing that you gotta so share with each other, and then there's a little. Some of you might have a little tab in your pen that you gotta pull out to make it work. So Matthew, yours has a white little tab. You just gotta pull it out like a pin in a fire engine. I mean a fire extinguisher. Yes. And then shine a light on your words. And maybe share.
Okay. So one says strength to see.
Is this from me?
This is for Megan. And then this is for me. Yes. And then
It's hard to
Is that
tell.
supposed to write one for you, Kalane?
No, because I only give you 2 slips of paper, so
this one says starlight.
that's from me.
And then this one says okay, this one, the other one I remember, it said, you are enough. And I really needed to hear that today. So whoever wrote that, thank you. I'm gonna keep this.
So you want me to read mine? So we have gratitude, love, vulnerability as vision.
Ooh.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Ooh, who wrote that? Me?
Oh, nice.
Woo! Yes. Yes. That was for me.
Sorry, I can't, I'm clearly beyond multitasking at this time of night. Thoughtfulness was one of them. Okay, now I'm going to do the other. You are enough. Thank you. I also needed to hear that tonight. Had a long few weeks of agonizing about something, and that is illuminating. No pun intended. And trust. I love that.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. I feel like I've just grown. This is just incredible. Thank you. We're gonna turn this over to the audience for a few questions. When you plan a festival in 6 months, you sometimes leave out a couple of details. So I forgot to station some volunteers who are comfortable with throwing things at people in the aisle, and I mean that because. So do I have any staff members in the audience who can help me throw a couple of items? Any staff members? All right, Ray, be gentle. Davey, all right. Davey is my partner / bartender / volunteer, and Ray is just our amazing assistant who's been helping us out. Okay, so these are actually microphones, and yeah, this is not my idea. This is the Paramount. They provided these microphones in these like Nerf ball type things. So if you have a question, and I might stand up for this because I can't, I can see you, but I can sort of, I don't know. I might just kind of like, ooh. Okay, so if you have a question, tell me your question. I mean, we'll raise your hand first, and then we're gonna give you a mic. Yeah. They can't, but if you have a question from the balcony and you want to sort of just like swing on down, because they're probably not going to be able to like.
Here we go.
Oh God, yeah, come down. Oh.
Wow.
My anxiety is showing. Yes.
Oh, so does this thing work too? Oh my God. How about that? It's my new friend. I have a question about illness. This is specifically to you. 13 years ago, I was diagnosed with advanced cancer. I'm well now. I'm good. Yes. But I was really sick for 2 years before that, going to people saying something's really wrong. something's really wrong and not being taken seriously. But my question is, if you find that other people have a similar experience. Once I had a diagnosis that I had cancer throughout my immune system, everybody went, oh my God, you poor thing. Whereas I was no sicker after I spent a week at UVA hospital and came out with a diagnosis than I was before that. And I actually also had advanced Lyme's and Epstein-Barr virus as well. But those things were so invisible. I'm just wondering, is this common? You've collected so many stories. Is this the common experience for people?
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story, and I'm sorry about all that you've gone through. I'm glad to hear you're doing better. It's so amazingly common. It's rather stunning, but it makes you realize, in fact, why we have language and why we have stories. And I think that the role of art and literature is to write the stories that don't exist so that we can all be seen. You know, that's one of the roles. And it is astonishing, but basically, if you think about it, a diagnosis, it comes from the ancient Greek, and gnosis is, has knowing in it. So it's a form of knowing, right? And knowing is a form of seeing. If you think about the word insight, right? If you think someone's telling you a complicated idea and you finally say, oh, I see. Right? I think this is all tangled up together, that diagnosis, insight, seeing, these are ways of knowing, and knowing is a way of seeing. And diagnosis is all the more important when the symptoms are invisible, as you say, and they create a kind of framework, a conceptual framework that is a shorthand for others. I remember that when I was pregnant with my first son, they gave me a medication that I had an allergic reaction to, so I had a rash all over my body. It looked horrific and it was very itchy, but it was very trivial from my perspective, having been very, very sick before. I went to the doctor and everyone was like, oh my God, you poor baby, are you okay? Like, my doctors were so nice to me. It was nothing, you know, but for years I had been, without diagnosis, without visible symptoms, and I was much sicker, but without those names, it goes unrecognized. So I think it's very, very common in my research, what you're saying.
Okay, we've got another balcony question, Davey. Okay.
I don't want to be the guy who misses.
All right.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. Really appreciate. I don't know if I'm talking to. Am I good?
Yeah,
all right.
You're good.
It's like definitely some feedback, but okay. I appreciate all of your scholarship, everything that you all have done. My question is also to Megan. Your comments made me reflect on some personal relationships that I have in my life and people that, you know, may be going through an invisible battle at this point in time. How do you suggest, what's the best way to engage with someone that is saying that they're going through something, but there are no visible symptoms? How do you, you know, uplift or empower those individuals? How can you be, you know, how can we be more sensitive to people that are dealing with this invisibility issue?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Thank you for, I think asking that question is actually the thing you can do, but I think you can give them the power of witness, right? You can give them the power of seeing them. We're built to want to fix, right? But I knew that none of my friends could fix what was wrong with me. My partner couldn't fix it. But what they could do was, on a day that I was really having bad symptoms, they could see in my face that I was drawn. And one friend of mine did this thing that I'll never forget. We were meeting for coffee and I was really not feeling well. And she took one look at me and she said, I see that you're suffering. Come, let's go sit down. I'll get you a tea. But I see that you're really suffering. So if you need to go, but you can go, but I'd like to just sit with you. And it sounds very small, but she just gave me the gift of witness and didn't ask anything of me, right? She gave me something by seeing it. it's surprising too how few people will say, could you just tell me about it? Tell me what's bothering you today. Tell me what bothers you the most. I'm just going to listen and learn, right? It's very few people have ever said that to me. And when they have, some of my friends have, it's been very, very powerful just to be able to talk. And I'll say too that often I think there's a joke among chronically ill people that people sometimes will say, well, why don't you tell me about what's going on? And then like 30 seconds later, their face just goes blank and it's clear they're thinking about something else. Like, I wish I never asked this question. So that's what I mean by that gift of witness, to like really authentically just be present, even for a short amount of time, and to see, I think, is an incredible thing to offer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yehusef. Other questions? Oh. That one was, oh, yeah, there we go. There's a toss.
You talk into this, okay, the top part. So my question is for Ms. Jeffers. I was curious, can you hear me? I can't really hear myself. Not really curious, but I found that like there was a relationship between shame and healing. It was really present and it spoke out to me, and I was just curious if you went in knowing that there would be like a dialogue between those two like feelings and emotions, and how you worked that out, because it was very healing to have read it, shame and healing all together, and I was just curious if that like existed when you first started, or if that was something that came around towards the end, or you just worked it through.
This one, okay. I think there's a good girlfriend of mine. We were on the phone one day, and she said, everybody grown has something that they don't want somebody to know about them. We were sort of talking about something I was embarrassed about, and she was like, if you live long enough, you're going to have something that you don't want somebody to know. And I thought about that because so many Black women have something that they're embarrassed about, either because someone in their community has told them to be embarrassed about it, or we get a lot of external things, you know, our hair, our bodies, how loud we are, we're not ladylike enough, and so on and so forth. But in particular, when we think about sexuality in Black women, there's always this sort of shame. And what I wanted to do is to have a journey. When I came back, the first draft was just the hot mess draft for me, right? But when I came back and I started looking at, you know, what I wanted to highlight is that if someone has been abused, the shame is not yours. The shame is not yours. And that's something that, you know, I had to learn, other people have to learn. But that's a hard lesson to learn. That's a lesson that many abuse survivors going through, and people are like, oh, is this your book? You know, is this your life? No, it's not. What I want to tell people is, you know, because some people have been tacky enough to ask me, are you an abuse survivor, right? You know, everybody doesn't have home training. But yes, I am an abuse survivor, but also something like 1 out of 3 female identified people are abuse survivors. So, you know, just because Ailey's an abuse survivor and I'm an abuse survivor doesn't mean this is my story. But I think that until you shine the light, you know, and you wrestle with whatever it is, but also in terms of slavery history, many Black people will say things like, you know, I'm tired of hearing about slavery. I'm tired of reading about slavery. I'm tired of seeing movies. And now that we have this whole national movement to erase Black history, I'm thinking, happy now? This is, you know. But there is no shame in our slavery history. And so what I wanted to do is to bring up different things that I have seen myself and other Black women be ashamed about. And the book is really difficult. There are some brutal points, you know, places. And it was hard for me to write. And, you know, Miss Rita and Mr. Fred, remember when I would come up on Facebook and say, I need prayer, and if you know, don't believe in God, just send good thoughts, right? Because this was a very difficult book. But I want people to understand that letting go of things is a journey, and it's a necessary journey. And there is nothing to be ashamed about with wrestling it. And I told myself that same thing. So I cried a lot when I read the book, and so that's why other people are crying. And I wrestled with my own shame with the book, and other people are going to wrestle. And it's not meant to be some kind of magic bullet, but naming something is a joy.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. We have time for one more question, maybe on this side of the. All right.
Does this work? Okay. So thank you all. This question is also for Megan. So your story kind of spoke to me. For 10 years, I went undiagnosed with both PCOS and endometriosis, which tend to affect women quite disproportionately. And so my question to you, and I ask this because I felt very empowered when I tracked all my symptoms. I'm a data scientist, and so I graphed everything and used a lot of code to make that happen. And so my question to you is, how did you get people to take you seriously and actually get diagnosed?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I love the graphs. I did a lot of graphing. I still graph. It's the best use of learning how to graph that I ever made. You know, what I wish I could go back and tell myself, and what I try to tell anyone who suspects that there's something going on and they're looking for answers, is if your medical practitioner, if your doctor, if your nurse practitioner, whoever it is not listening and is not there with you, you're never going to convince them. And it's not your job. Maybe you could, but it's not your job to convince them. It's their job to figure out what's going on. And so I do now think that I should have just moved on and looked for the right person more than put the burden on myself to figure out how do I kept thinking, if only I tell this story better, if only I come with more graphs, more labs. And then finally I did show up at a doctor's office with like all my labs and graphs, and they were like, I'll see you later. You know? You're too fixated on your health, right? So that, by the way, is a response that a lot of people I interviewed got, was that they would come prepared and their preparation would be used against them, in essence, as sign of their unhealthy fixation on their health. So I think the number one thing I did for myself was that at some point I began to listen to my own intuitions and inner voice. And I connected deeply to that, and I kept going until I found the right partners. And by the way, the people who got me better are conventional medical doctors who were great. It just took 15 years to find them.
Wow.
You know? Yeah. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but it's the answer I have.
Wow.
Well, I want to tell everyone, everyone here in the audience, thank you for your questions and your insight and your well, maybe not insight, because most of you, you know, I didn't ask, I wasn't exactly probing, like, hey, but I want to tell everyone thank you for being here and for for joining us tonight and for joining us for the festival. And I especially want to say thank you to these three, I'm going to use the word brilliant, and I know that, I'm going to say brilliant, these light-bearing, knowledge-bearing, amazing people on the stage.